Actually, it's funny. I was in an EdTech company, moved out to San Diego. Actually, was doing some part-time stuff and launching an EdTech company myself with another co-founder. And we're working on it, doing all the things that you probably shouldn't do as it relates to the process of trying to build a business. And then I actually just got presented with an opportunity to say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in operating and running this program that helps founders. And that was back in 2016.
Oh, wow.
And really been doing that work kind of ever since. So I had to say I kind of like fell into it. It wasn't something where I had sort of like a strict plan
Mhm.
around it. But yeah, I kind of fell into it, loved really working with early stage entrepreneurs and being
Mhm.
able to share any information that I have to help someone sort of along the way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Features with Hello Advisor. And this is a special content series where we're inviting founders and individuals that work in the startup world to share their stories and hear from their experiences. Now, today we're joined by Alex Waters. Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. We're so glad to have you with us. And Alex is the executive director at the Program Labs, where he's currently leveraging over 15 years of experience designing, building, and supporting social impact programs. And we'll get to hear more about that throughout this discussion today. But I don't want to steal your thunder, Alex. And so you have an extensive career in program building for startup communities. If you don't mind sort of introducing us to what you do and how you got started in the startup world.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me.
Of
Excited
course.
to have a bit of a conversation about it. So right now, I run a nonprofit called the Program Labs. It really focuses on helping other nonprofits, foundations, people in the social impact space build entrepreneurship kind of focused programs. And I kind of got led to that through my experience in startups. I spent a lot of years in ed tech, working for a company that scaled master's and doctoral programs and moved into sort of actually building out programs for startup founders at a place in San Diego called the Downtown San Diego Partnership. And then I spent the last 5 years prior to launching my new nonprofit at the Jacob Center for Neighborhood Innovation, where we launched the first business accelerator focused on basically low to moderate income and diverse founders in San Diego.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I know your work has been recognized by San Diego and multiple publications from the city. So obviously, the work that you're doing is making a difference there, and is pretty cool. I am curious though. I feel like when people talk about the startup world, there's a focus on the founders and the startups, obviously, and then there's the VC world. But why did you choose to sort of go down the route of becoming a program builder in the startup community?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So
Mhm.
it's funny. I was in an ed tech company, moved out to San Diego. Actually, was doing some part-time stuff and launching an ed tech company myself with another co-founder. And we're working on it, doing all the things that you probably shouldn't do as it relates to the process of trying to build a business. And then I actually just got presented with an opportunity to say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in operating and running this program that helps founders. And that was back in 2016.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and really been doing that work kind of ever since. So I had to say I kind of like fell into it. It wasn't something where I had sort of like a strict plan around
Mhm.
it. But yeah, I kind of fell into it, loved really working with early stage entrepreneurs and being
Mhm.
able to share any information that I have that helps someone sort of along the way.
Gotcha. Super cool, super cool. So I definitely want to get to talk about the work that you do and also the specific focus that you have, because organizations that you've led, that you've been a part of, have often supported underrepresented and overlooked entrepreneurs. Could you define for us what that sort of means and then how you made that a focus of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the core of it, it's like, if you look at communities all around, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial spirit, the entrepreneurship sort of desire, the, ability to work hard, all of those things are kind of evenly distributed, but like access to opportunity isn't. And so I think that that's a big piece of, for me at least, why the work that I do is really important because it is to just provide that opportunity for folks to be able to get access to resources, to get connected into sort of systems and networks. Um, because despite what some might think, it's like, there's a lot of things that have to go into somebody creating a very successful company, right? It's
Mhm.
not just by will of sheer force, despite what sometimes, the narrative is around folks where it's like, oh, they just, fought and wouldn't give up. And, that's the reason why they are now sort of in, a successful position, which, grit is a big part of that. Um,
Mhm.
but things like access to capital and access to networks and opportunities and connections, all of those things are not evenly distributed. And
Mhm.
so, I'd like to think that in my own little way, you provide that to communities, specifically communities of color, lower socioeconomic communities, spaces and places where people just don't have access, right? Uh,
Mhm.
so, so I guess that for me is why that's sort of important in all the things
Yeah.
I try to do.
No, totally, totally with you there. I feel like those disparities are not even acknowledged enough, especially in the startup world. Um, So yeah, kind of diving deeper into that. So from your experience working with these programs and getting to focus on the work that, or focusing your work with these underrepresented founders and their startups, what are some of the unique challenges that these founders experience that others may not? And then what role do startup communities and startup programs play in assisting these founders?
Yeah, I think the first part to kind of answer sort of like what is a challenge they face. I think you kind of mentioned it in the last piece where it's like, folks won't even acknowledge that it's something that might be a little bit different or harder or challenging, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
not that that means that anyone, has sort of operating a business and building a business is not easy. It's no like shortcuts, right? So it's not that people get by without doing the work. It's just more along the lines of like, well, do they have again the same sort of access to opportunity? And so somebody asked me one time before, it's like, okay, well, what makes it so different? And it's not so much so anything as it relates to the actual operations of the business, but it would be like if I said, hey, do you want to start a business? You say, sure, that'd be fantastic. I say, okay, for you, I'll give you $10 to start your business. For you, I'll give you $100,000 to start your business. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's just the difference and differentiation between those things. Or, hey, you know what I'm going to do? You're connected to all of these other people who can help you along the way, and you don't have any connections. So, good luck. And just everyone should be on the same pathway, and it should be just the same for everyone. And I think that that's the larger challenge is just not having kind of access, right? There's a lot of resources out there, there's a lot of opportunities out there, but if somebody can walk you in to connect with somebody, or if somebody can vouch for you to say, hey, you know what, I think they got a really good idea. Would you mind meeting with them? Like those kinds of things that I think sometimes folks take for granted when they're in a super well connected position, or if they're in a
Mm-hmm.
super well connected kind of environment. Uh, it kind of builds upon itself and you don't need as much as someone else who is from other places, right? Like a big thing is when they talk about sort of, what place is going to be, the next Silicon Valley, especially in sort of the VC world and startup world.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's to like not acknowledge that legitimately people have been doing things in technology and innovation there for the last like 60 years. Right. And so you
Mm-hmm.
build upon these different networks of opportunities, of people, of running into people. You can go to a coffee shop and you might go there and there's six people who have all launched startup tech businesses. Could be to varying degrees of success. But the fact that it's there, I think what people don't like to sort of acknowledge or think about is that like it's not all the same path. Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the more important part of you know, it being different because it's just not the same path in a lot of cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have, that person that's going to walk you into somewhere, or a school behind your name, and you're
Right.
like, oh, hey, I went to Stanford and dropped out and created business. Like, yeah, well, if I told you that I went to a community college and then I dropped out and I'm trying to get VC funding, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not a thing traditionally,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of those kinds of pieces where I think that's the larger thing. It's just a lot of times networks and capital are sort of the biggest challenges that people face that others might not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm really interested in the fact on how you tie that, like especially like to how people are looking at the future and maybe not even like giving as much thought to sort of like the deeper implications of like, geographical differences, acknowledging existing efforts and existing community as well. So yeah, my second part to that question was the role that startup communities and programs play in assisting those founders getting those resources. How do you connect them? How do you sort of bridge this gap? What does that sort of process look like?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, and some of the work that I've done in San Diego, it really is about finding what are going to be really powerful and valuable connections. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times, like you can just tell somebody that something exists, but can you actually make sort of like a high level introduction to individuals, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and find the thing that's going to fit that person. I think that's also a very much underestimated and overlooked thing with everything from, mentors to potential funding partners to individuals that might be able to give you some insight or guidance. Everyone is different. And so there's not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked with a lot of different folks. And for example, when we sort of pair people with mentors, right? Just because someone has a wealth of information, if the mentor isn't a good match because the way they think you should operate is different than the way you think you should operate, or you're just not as receptive to the way that they might be telling you to go about doing things, then it doesn't typically tend to work, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think people often champion, and I think sports in a weird way is kind of a microcosm of this, right? Like people are like, oh, you have to coach different players differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times we kind of miss that when we say, okay, well, go here and get this thing. I think the bigger part is making sure that whatever that is, it's really um, well suited to the actual individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard because that takes time because you actually have to know people. It's not a, hey, I just filled out this form and now I got this, mentor or this resource. And so it's really kind of taking the time to be able to do that. But there's a ton of organizations that do, an incredible job. Where in San Diego, the SBDC is very active, and you have the universities all have programs, and there's groups like Startup San Diego, and so there's a lot that's here. But it is sometimes about sort of navigating what that looks like to find a thing that really fits well and speaks well to you as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm hearing, there's just a lack of like personalization, getting to know the company, and really understanding the founder and the startup when connecting them to these resources. And that's something that you're trying to work on.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, because it's not for a lack of effort. It's just it's hard, right? Somebody has to
Mm-hmm.
be able to tell you, okay, this is how I operate. And sometimes people don't even know, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
may not know if you've never worked with a mentor or a business coach or something. Like you might not be thinking about it. Um, but I, can only speak from my own personal experience, right? There's been times when people are like, hey, you should go and work with them, and then somebody gives me some inside information or speaks to me a certain kind of way, and it's like, oh, okay, well then they say, hey, you got to do this, this, and this, and I'm like, well, I don't know how that feels, and then normally the way people handle that is to just not get back in touch with them. It's not like they're not going to
Yeah.
have an argument. It's just I'm just not going to return an email, or I'm
Yeah.
just not going to push to have another meeting, or I'm not going to follow up. Um, and that happens, I think, pretty frequently if it's not a good pairing and not a good match.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely, that is true. But yeah, so that's looking at sort of the now, and let's broaden the viewpoint and thinking a little bit more long term. What do you think needs to change on like a more macro or grander level so that sort of this disparity that minority or underrepresented founders, um, we can reduce the amount of like these unique challenges they face, and sort of get them closer to resources and make that access a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, man, I think a reduction in the stigma around not having the kind of success that you think the first time out. And I think that's a really big challenge, right? Because
Mhm.
people might have, like I said, financial constraints, or there's the pressure of, being in the community or going in a different direction than other people who might be around you, right? Like it becomes very challenging. Um, because by and large, I mean, the data is the data, and the first business that somebody starts is not normally going to be the thing that is like the massive business, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't really tell people that. We tell people go start a business and get successful. But like when you hear the stories of people who have been successful, they're like, oh no, this is like my eighth business. It's like I had two went bankrupt, that this thing happened, blah, blah, like partners
Mm-hmm.
didn't work out well. And so I think getting rid of that stigma of if you are moving into entrepreneurship, it's really building the skills to be able to then execute and be efficient and take advantage of what's happening in a specific time frame. But that might not be with the first thing that you do, right? And
Right.
I think that really kind of transforms things, because I think also a little bit of it is, this is my own sort of non-scientific thought on it. A little bit of it is um, in other places around the world, the notion of like owning a business or being an entrepreneur is like very different, because
Mm-hmm.
there aren't necessarily as many opportunities in some cases in some places to just go work for a gigantic company, right? So
Mm-hmm.
everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody sells something. Everybody has some kind of business on the side that they operate and they run just because that's how the economies work.
Mm-hmm.
I think here, when people hear people are going to do that, especially, over the last, I don't know, 70 years or so, um, it's like bucking a trend, right? So instead of getting a job, you're taking a risk to be an entrepreneur, where
Mm-hmm.
I think other places and other parts, it's not that same kind of thing. It's like, of course, somebody has a store. Of course, somebody does some other, like, because that's just what people do.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I think there's a level of, risk that's associated with it. Uh, And so that becomes kind of like a part of the downside, because a lot of people start businesses and sometimes they don't work. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay, right? That's
Yeah.
life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But can you take what you learned and then go to the next thing, right? Without feeling like you failed. It's just you learned. And
Mm-hmm.
building a business is hard, right? It's a very hard thing to do. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I never realized like how culturally like reinforced that idea is. And I'm assuming you're just referring to like the States specifically. But yeah, that's really interesting and maybe good to keep in mind for any founders that are be listening to this, sort of the context that you're working in. Um, But so that's some really great perspective, and I hope that changes the minds of like founders and VCs that will be listening to this. I do also want to talk about your work in program building, a little bit more of your approach that you take to setting up these sort of structures for startups. So what are some non-negotiables you hold to when building a platform or program for startup empowerment? So in other words, I know we have a couple fellow program builders that might be listening to this interview as well. Um, what would you recommend to them to really consider when they're building their own startup community?
yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple things. There's more like the sort of um I say sort of like the overarching kind of how the community sort of operates in like the large sense, and then like obviously like the tactical part. So like
Hmm.
for the large sense, it's like if you are going to create something that is supposed to be for a community, and then regardless of what community that is, because I think sometimes that, I'll be honest, sometimes that term or the word community can be a little bit of a misnomer,
Hmm.
because like communities can be communities within communities, and you can have like sort of subsections and subgroups. But that aside, if you're building something for a community, then like making sure that the individuals in the community have a part of what that is, right? And like
Hmm.
are able to provide feedback and are able to just sort of, be at the table as you're creating things, I think is central to pretty much everything, right?
Hmm.
Because it's very hard to say that you're building something for a community if you're not actually taking in any input, if you're not actually, um, you know, really delivering something that's going to be of value. Um,
Hmm.
and that might mean in some cases that like, you get some tough feedback, right? People like, hey, I
Yeah.
was doing this thing, I thought it was great. And people are like, no, actually, that's not great. And we don't really like that. And so you need to do something different. It's like, okay, you have to own that and then create something different that is
Hmm.
going to be better, that is going to yield better results over time. And I think for a lot of folks that might be ecosystem builders or trying to do some kind of stuff, that might be a little bit of a challenge because, we all have our thoughts on what would work and what might not work. But keeping that sort of, I don't know, the best way to describe it, sort of the communication open, and understanding that what you're building is not for you,
Mhm.
right? If you're going to be building something about a community, like you may be a part of the community, but it's not for you. It's for the
Mhm.
community. And so I think that's the first piece. The second part, in terms of tactical pieces of it, is to constantly sort of be not just learning, but willing to start new things consistently and in things that don't work.
Mhm.
And that's a real tough one, especially if people who spent a lot of time in something, in building something. Um, because there's a part of their sort of a lot of times identity that's wrapped up into that thing. But if it's not work and it doesn't work, then like you have to craft and create something different.
Mhm.
The other part is as you're building a program, let's say for entrepreneurs, you have to really think of like what you can actually do versus what you might think is the best thing to exist. Because a lot of times the programs in and of themselves are misaligned with the organization as a whole. And so everyone's not really on the same page. And so a lot of the work that I do now, especially with the program labs, is making sure that there is a very clear alignment,
Mhm.
not just in what the program is going to be delivering, but that it's aligned with the organization as a whole, right? How does this
Mhm.
fit into what the organization wants to do, the other people, the other departments? You know, does marketing know what you do? Can they tell you what you actually do? Not in buzzwords or terms, but like, do they actually know what you do? Does finance know what you do? Does other people who are doing sort of community outreach do like so all of these things inside of a nonprofit, like do those all align because they're all going to be really important to the success of your program um, long term. And I think that
Mhm.
there's better ways with which all of us can do it. And I learned a lot through trial and error. In all of everything that I talk about, I've learned a lot about sort of through trial and work running programs and closing programs and doing all different kinds of stuff that I
Mhm.
think that's the space to start. So someone should start there in thinking about what are the questions that I need to be asking myself before I even start building as it relates to kind of capacity. And then
Mhm.
you can start moving into, well, we're going to do this and this and this and this.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow, that's really good advice. And it sounds like it didn't come easily, that there were some challenges and difficulties in your own experience that sort of led you to these conclusions. If you wouldn't mind me asking, so from your past work for to the program labs, which you're working on right now, what have been some of the obstacles that you faced while building these programs? And then, how did you get around them?
Yeah, one, there's always an obstacle of sort of as you relate to thinking about like funding.
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
you might think you're doing the greatest thing ever. And I've had meetings before where you're working somewhere and you're building something, and then you go and talk to a funder, and they're like, what are you doing? This is not what I thought it was going to be. Or this is not, and those can be awkward meetings. Those are not always the greatest of meetings. Or organizations shift their desire in wanting to do something, and so it's like, oh, okay, well, we were doing this, but we really don't have a need anymore, so we're moving in another direction. It's like, okay, well, that's fine, and that happens. Um, but that's been a big one.
Mhm.
Um, Again, I think like I said, sort of keeping the community sort of central in all the things that you do, because it can be very easy, especially as someone who's maybe responsible for a program manager, program director, uh,
Mhm.
to really be focused on uh, outputs and not outcomes. So like doing stuff, and
Mhm.
they want it to look like everything else because everyone else is doing somewhat similar the same things. But oftentimes you might not necessarily know what's going on inside of another organization. I mean, we all talk to
Mhm.
each other as, people who are nonprofits, but not everyone knows exactly what all the nonprofits are thinking and what leadership might be if you're not actually having, sometimes that communication with the executive leadership in your org. And so that's been a big lesson learned. Um, then no matter how good you think something is, there's always a ton of area for improvement. Uh,
Mm. Mhm.
we ran a when I was at the Jacob Center with the Business Accelerator. We did 9 cohorts of folks going through, right? And that's
Mhm.
fantastic. But like what cohort 1 looked like versus what cohort 9 looked like is like so dramatically different. And every time we were making adjustments and
Uh-huh.
changes and getting feedback. And a part of what I was talking about before, it's like sometimes it's hard to get feedback from people that say, yeah, we did this thing, but it wasn't any good. And you hear it from a couple of different people, you're like, oh man, like I spent a lot of time like trying to build that and create this. And
Mhm.
like, yeah, well, it just wasn't. And so okay, how do we make it better? How do we continue to do it? Because again, it's not for any one individual. It's for
Mhm.
kind of the collective. So
Gotcha. That must be incredibly humbling to hear from your cohorts and from others that have been a part of your programs. But I'm sure it's all good feedback mostly.
yeah, I mean, like at the end of the day, I think with that program and with stuff that we're on now, did an incredible job. I think that there's a lot of hard work that a lot of people did along the way, from people who came in and did lectures, the mentors, to folks that just supported, right? Like, and overall, I think we sort of, if you're going to give us a grade, I think we, got a great scale on that. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, there were some
Mhm.
times when folks were like, yeah, no, this part isn't working, or this thing isn't this, or, I know you kind of want us to do this, but this isn't really working out super great. And you got to
Mhm.
take it, and
Mhm.
understand where it comes from, and understand that,
Mhm.
uh, which I don't think people talk about enough, but like, there is a level of generosity in people giving feedback. Um, because if people just don't care, then they just won't say anything. But if they care and they think that there's something that's positive that could happen through some changes or shifts or adjustments or iterations, then they will say, hey, this thing didn't really work out, right? Or this
Mhm.
thing wasn't the sort of the best. Um, Otherwise, they'd just be like, all right, whatever, no big deal. I'll just
Mhm.
keep it moving, right? Like,
Yeah,
and so I
totally.
appreciate that people taking the time to actually give honest and legitimate feedback and critique, because that not only helps us get better right now in the moment, but it
Mhm.
helps us to help other people down the line, because we can take
Mhm.
those learnings and shift and adjust and make sure that we're continuing just to get better um, all around in what we do.
Yeah, well, I love that gratitude. That's actually very, very impressive that you keep that mentality on. So, taking it down now to a more personal level, uh, from across the work that you've done over the past 15 years and what you're doing now, what sort of impact, both short term and long term, are you looking to make on the startup ecosystem? Now, I know you focus primarily on the San Diego area. So what are some of your goals and your aspirations for the city?
Yeah, I mean, look, San Diego is an incredible space, and
Mhm.
startup ecosystem here. There's a lot uh, that is happening and occurring, and there's different pockets that are doing sort of incredibly well. Um, I think for me, the goal is to make it so that anybody that wants to sort of move into the space feels like they are welcome in the space,
Mhm.
and that's a really big part of it. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked, because there are, a lot of success, right? I mean, San Diego's
Mhm.
is a pretty big city. They have a quite a large mark in terms of the companies that they're building and they're creating. But like, if everybody doesn't feel comfortable in spaces and in around spaces, then that's problematic. Like that's a little bit of a challenge, right? Uh,
Mhm.
I always used to say that there's a real difference between saying, well, everyone was invited to a party, versus if someone is there, you caring if I came and had a good time. Like,
Mhm.
and that's a big distinction that I think sometimes it's not enough just to say, well, everyone can show up. It's like, well,
Mhm.
do you care that I came, and do you care if my experience was a good experience or not? Uh,
Mhm.
and so for me, ideally long term, I'd love to create sort of like just a large space for folks that are sort of serve as as the front door. I stole
Mhm.
that term from a person here who was a community builder as well, Andy White. He's always like, "Where's the front door? Where's the front door?" Um,
Mhm.
because I think that there are other cities, and I think we're large enough that we could actually sort of have that in the grand scheme of things. There's a couple of large projects. There's one in Michigan, and I was just looking at that they
Mhm.
had put together, and then there's one in Paris called Station F,
Oh,
which
wow.
I would highly recommend. Are you familiar with that, Station
Oh
F?
no, but out Paris, I mean, I'm not super well versed with the startup communities outside of the US, but I think it's very cool that you guys or you're interested in checking out, what people are building in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, yeah. So it's this like startup campus. They did look, it's a massive project. They redid like a whole train station, and like now they have um it's like a retail startup.
Mm-hmm.
They have accelerators, VCs, they work with corporates. It's this incredible sort of space, at least. I mean, I've never seen it in person, but like from what I've read about it and like all the kinds of things like that. This space and what I think uh what I would like to see happen is having that kind of thing where it is this massive overlap of all the different kinds of things that are really important to an
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem. Where if anybody needs to know, okay, well, where's the first place that you go? It's like you go there and you start
Mm-hmm.
there, and then you can help you navigate through what you need to do to get to the resources that you need. Because again, everybody's a little bit different while they're there. But that was like a massive infrastructure project. But if I can hope and dream, that would be the dream to, the program labs has this massive space where we are working with not only just sort of grassroots community-based organizations that are doing things from a sort of community perspective to businesses, to startups, to solopreneurs, to everybody, um,
Mm-hmm.
because to really have I think, a thriving community as a whole, you need all of
Mm-hmm.
those parts. It's not
Mm-hmm.
any one part that's should be valued more than the other. All of them are really important to have a really high quality of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, everyone who's listening, you heard it here. You've got an advocate if you head to San Diego, and San Diego will always be looking after the underdogs. And
Yeah.
that's super cool. Can't wait to see how that process goes, and I hope you'll be able to build that one day. Um, so we're reaching towards the end of our time together, and at the end of each of these interviews, I always end with a couple questions that leave our listeners with a bit of advice and some grander takeaways from our conversation. So uh, the first question kind of I created while I was preparing for this interview, and you've done. There's that saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And after speaking with several founders, some of who have like described starting and developing their startup as kind of like raising their own child and seeing it grow. Um, it's kind of interesting sort of the role that startup programs and like people who want to help them grow and develop their company, what kind of role that they play. So what would you say to founders who are not yet a part of any startup community or program or entrepreneurship program? How would you convince them and maybe get them to consider joining one?
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of laid it all out, right? Like
Oh,
it takes, you know what I mean?
well, I
Like
want to hear
it
through your
takes
words, Alex.
I think it takes a. I mean, look, it is true. It's like uh, there's real strength in numbers and access and networks that people might not be thinking about, but the greater the sort of force multiplier that you have in being inside of sort of a network or a community uh, can be the difference between sort of moving successfully or kind of just trying to grind it out by yourself. For a lot of folks, entrepreneurship can be a very lonely space to be in, especially if you don't have, a lot of colleagues, friends, or family who are or who have gone down that pathway. And so finding folks that you can talk to about everything, the good, the bad, the indifferent, I think is really, really valuable. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think it's just like anything else, right? A lot of times things are better in the collective, right? If you're
Mhm.
working with people, if you're around people, just for little insights and guide, like, you'd be surprised, you talk to somebody and they'll, save you 5 days worth of research and work because they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, no, I had that same problem. Maybe you should try doing X. You're like, oh, wow, okay, that was great,
You
right?
just never know.
Yeah, but those things kind of reinforce themselves over time, because if you're building around people and people see what you're doing, there's a level of sort of understanding and camaraderie and similarness around things. It can be, I guess, it's super impactful and super helpful. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome and so true. Um, and then my last question for you. So as a leader and a mentor for startups, you have a perspective that not many founders get to view their growth or development from. And so from your experience, what sort of takeaways have you gleaned? And then what do you wish more startups knew before they began the journey to building their startup?
uh, so I think number one, it's probably going to take a lot longer than you think it is
Hmm.
to actually build something. To your last question about spending the time to actually create your network, a lot of times people overlook that. They're like, oh man, it'd be so good if I had people who were around. And it's like, yeah, well, you have to kind of invest that
Hmm.
time. You have to invest the time in grabbing a coffee and talking with people, and like, because then you build those, sort of um, build those, whether it's a friendship or you build sort of an opportunity to have somebody else who's just in the community who's doing some of the same things that you're doing. um Money is not always going to be the be all end all. And also the I think the final thing that I would say is, especially as it relates to sort of venture capital, at least from what I've seen,
Hmm.
there are specific standards and rules for venture capital and how it operates. I don't think it's optimized. It's not necessarily as inclusive as it should be, but that is how that game is played. And I see a lot of founders sometimes moving into that space and are upset about how that game is played. And I don't
Hmm.
necessarily think that it's a great thing of how it's structured and set up, but it's very, very hard to kind of be like, well, I'm in this thing, and well, I don't like any of the rules of the thing. It's like, well, that's fine.
Hmm.
You should probably then go and find other ways or other things to kind of structure and do, right? I use this
Hmm.
analogy sort of all the time, and I don't know if it's a good one or not, but it's like, if you sit down and you look at a chessboard or a checkers board, it's exactly the same, right?
Hmm.
But if you sit down and you're like, okay, we're going to play chess, you're like, okay, and then you're like, well, now I want to play checkers. It's like you can't. That's not how that works, right?
Hmm.
And so I think it's unfortunate because if you're familiar with all the numbers and the statistics and the data and the investment, the minorities, women, like it hasn't moved in a long time, and it's a very low percentage,
Hmm.
which I would love to see sort of shift and adjust. But considering that it is not shifting and it is not adjusting, then
Hmm.
you have to account for that and understand what you're getting into if you're going to go down that pathway. Because
Hmm.
otherwise, I think it creates a lot of stress and a lot of strain on folks.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great perspective. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that concludes our conversation. Thank you again so much for joining us and for sharing from your experiences and honestly giving some really, really meaningful pieces of advice, especially for those founders from underrepresented backgrounds. Um, yeah,
Cool.
thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I think that concludes our session.